Hey everyone, it's Crypto Dantes here. Quick word from our sponsor. Yes, we have a sponsor. It's an independent author named Chris Hannon who's penned an absolute cracker of a novel. It's called Orca Rising, and it's the acclaimed first book in a spy thriller trilogy shortlisted for the People's Book Prize. People are comparing it to the likes of Hunger Games and The Maze Runner. If you enjoyed those, you're going to love Orca Rising. So check it out. That's ORCA Rising, Orca Rising on Amazon. And you can also buy it directly from the author himself. That's csjhannon.com/crypto. C for crypto, S for sugar, J for J, hannon.com/crypto. And Orca Rising can be yours for just 150,000 sats. Get it now before the price goes up. I'm in before the film writes.
Hi, this is William Quigley. Welcome to Crypto and Grill.
Okay everyone, welcome back. Let's Crypto and Grill. As usual, it's Crypto Dantes here and I'm with Stig of The Pump. Stig, how are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. I've sort of been the last week or so in preparation for this. I've been channeling like my late 90s, early 2000s childhood gaming obsessions, picking up games like Baldur's Gate and Diablo. It's been a lot of fun. There's a really geeky side to me in case people hadn't realized by now.
Well, we haven't even introduced our guest yet, but you're giving far too many spoilers away. But personally, I'm still recovering from the last session where we were talking about the nature of reality and whether we live in a simulation. So that I'm still struggling from that one. I'm slightly downbeat, and I think we may be living in a simulation. I'm still not sure. But let's move swiftly on. So we have got a fantastic guest today, William. It's fantastic to have you here with us. Please say hello and introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is William Quigley, and I am the CEO of OPSKINS and WAX.
Excellent. So for the uninitiated and for our listeners that may not know about OPSKINS and WAX, why don't you take us through what they are? A bit more background about yourself and how you got into OPSKINS and WAX, and the relationship between the two organizations would be fantastic.
Sure. Well, so I've been a venture capitalist for many years. I began my career in a financial services firm, Arthur Andersen, and working in the banking industry. I then went on to the Walt Disney Company, did a lot of different projects at the Walt Disney Company before I got very excited about the internet. It was just beginning and seemed like there was a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurship. So I worked with a couple of other guys, and we partnered with what was then the first incubator. It was called Idea Lab, a very successful Web 1.0 incubator, probably the most successful incubator. And we had a venture capital fund that would invest alongside what we thought were promising incubated projects. And from there, we expanded into many other things, not just internet. Initially, that's what it was, but then ultimately things like payment companies and software companies. And eventually I found my way to the area that I'm very focused on now, which is blockchain and crypto. And there's a nice intersection there between blockchain and crypto with what we were doing, my partners and I, previously. We were spending a lot of time in the video gaming space. And it turns out there's many relationships that exist between the video gaming world and the cryptocurrency and blockchain world. And we were the first, I think, to see that was maybe the best place to get mass market adoption of crypto-related assets crypto-related applications. And so we launched WAX to try to kind of bridge the gap between the video gaming world and the cryptocurrency world.
Okay, fantastic. So if we were to start at the beginning then, in a gaming context, could you possibly talk us through sort of what a digital asset is, what a skin is, what a digital upgrade is, just to provide some context for the kind of blockchain and gaming?
Sure. So many people play games now. I think globally it's at least 2 billion, that virtually everybody's going to be familiar with the in-game virtual items. Those little things that you either win or you pay for to do better in a game. Actually, up until maybe 7 or 8 years ago, these virtual items were mostly utilitarian, meaning you would use them and acquire them to be able to do something in the game, make you last longer, make you more powerful, whatever it is. About maybe it's 8 years ago, but it could be longer, we started to get mainstream adoption of what I call cosmetic items. These are virtual items that have no utility. They're strictly, as the name implies, cosmetic. They maybe are an article of clothing you would wear in the game, your avatar would have on. And for many reasons, we probably don't have time to get into it today, once virtual items took on a cosmetic aspect, they became that industry, the video game industry, and the virtual items in that industry became much, much bigger from a financial perspective. Lots more people want cosmetic-oriented virtual items than they do virtual items that allow you to do something better in a game. And as a result, the video game industry is now probably over maybe 140 or 150 billion annually. It's globally, where 80 or 90 billion dollars of that is people who are buying virtual items. So virtual items have really become like the primary revenue model for the video gaming industry.
Yeah, so if I think back to when I first became aware of some form of digital assets, it's probably around the early days of Facebook. It wasn't even in the gaming context. I remember there was this ability to put stickers on a post, and people were uploading these sticker packs, and you could buy them. You would buy these packs and gift them to your friends, and it would just kind of give a more emotive reaction to a post. And now that's all embedded with emojis. But that was a new innovation at the time, and you could pay for these. And I think the thing that just never made sense to me at all was why someone would ever actually pay for that, because they were infinitely reproducible. There was no scarcity of them. And I think what
there's no scarcity of McDonald's hamburgers, but
this is true. But I think in terms of where we are today, is the real value, is there more value now that we could potentially apply the blockchain technology and distributed ledger techniques to these assets to assure gamers, users of their scarcity and verify that they're authentic?
Yeah, so because I know we want to talk about blockchain and such, here's what I would say: the video game industry is doing just fine without blockchain and without crypto. It could do a lot better with it. I would liken it to the retail industry, the mail order catalog industry in pre-internet era. It was doing fine, but it could do a lot better if we added some new capabilities. That's what the crypto does. It provides new capabilities for people who want to buy these virtual items. I'll give you a very simple example. A virtual item lives only in that particular game. And some people spend lots of money, thousands of dollars, thousands of hours in that game, building up these really great collections of virtual items. But if that game ever shuts down, or if they ever get bored of that game, all of that work is gone. right? Because they're virtual and because they only live in that game, they're not transportable anywhere else. You could call that a shortcoming, let's say, of the video gaming industry. It's also a design feature, much like Apple likes to have closed systems because they find they don't have to compete with anybody. Video game companies like the idea of being the only company selling you virtual items in their game. And they don't have a lot of incentive today for people to take those virtual items and leave the game. On the other hand, consumers, game players, would love the idea of being able to port their virtual items into other games and even outside of the game environment entirely. And so that's one element of what blockchain can do. Because blockchain, I like to think about it just as another internet. And, you can traverse from one e-commerce site to another on the internet. There's no problem. Well, in a way, blockchain can allow you to take these digital assets, these virtual items, and move them from one place to another, from one game to another. What I'm seeing today is the existing video game companies don't have a lot of motivation to integrate that blockchain capability. So what you're seeing is native blockchain-based companies, companies that began as blockchain-based companies, these video games, and they're introducing this concept of buy your virtual items from us, but use them anywhere that they're allowed. And that's one aspect of a sort of blockchain moving into the video game world.
But how does that gaming interoperability then work? Sorry, it's slightly away from the blockchain topic. But how does that gaming interoperability work? How do I turn up from with one thing from one game to another game with another thing? Sure.
So it's all about, in the IT world, we talk about standards-based technology, like 802.11, Wi-Fi, whatever, Bluetooth. So there are different standards in the blockchain world, but you can have a virtual item that's made on a particular blockchain. It could be mine called WAX. It could be Ethereum. Mm-hmm. And any of those objects, let's say on WAX or Ethereum, can be used in any game that accepts WAX or Ethereum objects. Most of the first generation video games started out with Ethereum-based objects because Ethereum, which is a blockchain for your audience, Ethereum was the first to really popularize the idea of you can have a unique virtual item, and then people started to say, wow, well then maybe we could make them into game virtual items, and we could just accept any objects that happen to have an Ethereum foundation. And so there are now, I'm going to guess, thousands of games that accept these Ethereum objects, and we're seeing a lot of innovation in that area where different blockchains like ours at WAX and others are starting to put more development and more innovation into what would video gamers really like in these virtual objects. And so the way I see it when I put on my venture capital hat, it's almost always the case when a new technology arrives, the incumbent companies, the companies that are already in the market, let's say the retailers of the mid-1990s, they are going to be very hesitant to adopt a new technology because A, they don't know if it's going to be around for long or if it's a fad, and B, they don't know how it's going to affect their business. And so they're very hesitant to introduce new concepts. The companies that tend to introduce them are the ones that are starting from scratch and are maybe inspired by that technology and say, wow, I could compete with these existing businesses if I use this new technology. Mm-hmm. And so we've seen the very same thing in the video game space. The the very first company, I think, to do this in a popular way was a company called CryptoKitties. And it's hard to call it a game. It was a very, very basic thing, sort of like those very first generation games you had on Facebook. But it introduced this idea of, these cryptos that I thought were just for money and payments, like Bitcoin, can actually take on a different dimension. They can be virtual objects, and they can do something that's always been what I alluded to earlier. It's been sort of the holy grail for video game players, which is they retain the ownership of those virtual items. Up until now, you don't own those virtual items in a video game. Actually, you license the items, much the way a lot of software companies work. But if you've paid a lot of money for those items and you put a lot of time into building up your item portfolio in a game, a lot of people feel like, wow, we should be able to own them. What I foresee is, for now, an emerging group of games that started out on blockchain. They were native to blockchain. And in a few years, I suspect some of the bigger existing video game companies will start to say, yeah, this looks like it's getting popular. Maybe we should start to adopt it. And, by the way, like I said, it's the same in every tech, even in the very same industry. So you had video games years ago that were all done on in arcades, and then they became possible to be done on PCs. And then people made what we call flash games or browser-based games. Mm-hmm. And then you had mobile games. And what's always funny to me anyway is every time a new technical capability arrives, the existing video game companies poo-poo it. They say, "Oh, those aren't real games." When video games became possible to be done on computers, the arcade people said those aren't real games. And then when you could do a game in a browser like Farmville, the PC-based gamers said, well, those aren't real games, right? And this happened with mobile too. No one thought mobile games were real games until billions of people started to play them. And now every video game company wouldn't think of doing a game without making it mobile compatible. I do think this ultimately is something that gets adopted. The blockchain, special properties of blockchain get adopted by video game companies. But like everything, it takes some period of time.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So just picking on a couple of points there, William, I was preparing for the interview and just having a look into what WAX and OPSKINS does. And I was having a look on the WAX site, and I was looking at these digital assets and the in-game upgrades, and I thought, yeah, maybe I can see why someone would want to enhance their avatar or their arsenal and upgrade guns by sort of $10 or $15, something like that. So I did a reverse search on sort by price. And I saw on the site that there was a particular knife on there that's for some kind of digital knife for I'm not exactly sure what game. It was $14,000, and there was a special gun on there for $11,000. So I'm just trying to understand what kind of motivation, what would motivate someone to spend that much money on an in-game asset. That's
yes,
such a huge amount of money.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, but because me and my partners and other people in our industry, we've been doing this for so long that we lose sight of the fact that other people, it would look absolutely bizarre. So particularly as you put it, when this virtual knife, which by the way is not actually a knife, it's just a paint application on a knife. We call these things skins. They're not the object themselves. They're just a way of coloring it. Think of it as putting on a different colored T-shirt, right? So what I would, the best way I can explain it is this: to a lot of people, particularly the 600 or 700 million people a day who play in these massively multiplayer online video game worlds, and they are like worlds. There are millions of people who are interacting for hours each day in these places. These people, for many of them, their interactions, their communication, their social groups within these video game worlds are just as important as in what you and I would call the, quote, real world. And if we take a look at like any real world thing, I'm not really into automobiles, right? So I've got, a Lexus, the boring old Lexus. There are friends of mine who have cars that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And on one level, what I say to them is, my car turns, it goes on the highway, it takes me to point A to point B, and yours does the same thing, but yours costs 5 times more than mine. And it's like, yeah, but I feel good riding in that expensive Porsche or whatever. Another example I'll give you is precious stones. So someone once said to me, I can't imagine anybody spending, it was like $50,000 for an in-game virtual item. And, what can you do with it? It doesn't have any utility. And I said, well, you have a nice big diamond on your hand. Does that make you run faster? Does that make you smarter? Does that allow you access to some special venues? And of course, she was like, no, it's, well, why would someone have spent so much money on that? Well, it's sentimental value, makes me feel good. The vast majority of things in the world have a price that has virtually nothing to do with the utility around them. Virtually nothing. If you look at someone who's wearing $1,000 sneakers, they can spend $10 and get things to cover their feet when they walk. But you know what? They feel better. So think about it that way. Okay. It's one of those things when the people who never ask me that question are brand managers of fashion-oriented companies, because they sort of get that yeah, a Rolex watch. I don't know all the mechanical aspects of it, but I assume the parts of that watch probably are less than 20% of what the retail value is, because you're selling a lifestyle, you're selling an image. It's the same with virtual items. So that's the reason why. I don't know the particular virtual item you looked at, but I would gather that it was an item that was quite rare and maybe had, it might even have been a one of a kind, not just a limited edition. And therefore, what are you going to pay for a one of a kind anything, right? That one of a kind article that might be a collectible trading card where that might sell for tens of thousands of dollars. It's mostly because it's special. You can't get another one just like it.
Okay. That's really helpful, and thank you for the subtle career advice. I shall not be pursuing brand management as a career. Thank you. So just a slight follow-up to there. So I'm going to go slightly retro here, and you may need to course correct me, because if I think back to I grew up in the 90s, N64, GoldenEye, best game probably still to date ever. I'd happily disagree with anybody on that front, but James Bond GoldenEye on the M64, there was a special gun on that game, and it was a golden gun level, and that gun had much better ability to eviscerate enemies. It had much better targeting focus. So if I just what you just said there is what you're looking at, and what you're buying is a skin rather than perhaps an asset itself. Are there also actual asset upgrades which give your characters and your avatars better capabilities? And does then that, one thing that you mentioned previously was this interoperability and standards across games. does the physics of that game transfer to another game, or do you just take that investment via your avatar into a new game, which effectively translates to an equivalent value in that game? How does that?
Yeah, here's what I would say. I tend not to focus as much on that area simply because, I'll give you an answer, but it's because I spent my career at the Walt Disney Company. We think a lot about branding, right? As I commented on earlier, the utility value of something is inconsequential to a lot of video gamers, right? Just like the fact that Givenchy T-shirt, maybe the cotton is slightly warmer and softer. I don't think really anybody cares. They just want to look cool. So, but on to your point. So this all comes down to interoperability, comes down to what the video game companies choose to do. Most of them build their games off of certain platforms. So Unity is is the most popular game development platform for mobile games. And so you build in what we call the Unity environment. And so if somebody wants to create, a blockchain person, let's say, wants to create a virtual object that could be used in any Unity-based game and would be able to take on whatever physic elements that game designer designed into the game, then that's pretty simple to do, right? You have basically an SDK, software development kit. Your developers can go and take a look at these objects. They can see how they would work in their game because these objects were built using the same Unity development platform. And you can turn on or not the special characteristics that element comes with, or you can just make it strictly cosmetic. You can kind of tune it to whatever you want. So that part of it is quite simple, I would say. It's anytime you're dealing with, while Unity isn't an open standard, it is the dominant standard. It would be like an Android-based game or a Apple iOS-based game. If you're familiar with that as a developer, you can make a tool that works in any game that uses that software development platform. And how that will happen, I don't particularly know, because I think most video game designers now understand the utility of the object is a secondary to the coolness of it. So there's, for instance, a lot more thinking from an economic perspective when it comes to virtual objects in games than there is from a technical perspective. The technical perspective is almost trivial at this point. Hey, you want that thing to have a 5 power energy capability? Well, dial it to have 5 powers. No one, that's very basic. So what interests me the most is the economic piece of it. If for instance, I will give you the most important economic element to a virtual item, bar none. That is tradability. The ability to transfer the ownership from one person to another is it. If you look at video games that allow the transfer of an item from one person to another versus those that don't, it's order of magnitude difference in the value of those items. And that makes sense because, if you were to buy an automobile from a car company that said, it works great, but you may never transfer ownership. You may never sell it. One, I don't think they would sell many of them. But two, you wouldn't pay much for it because it's that option to be able to trade it for something else you want. Maybe you have kids and you want more seats. That provides value to it. Imagine buying a home and not being able to trade it. So those objects that have tradability become much more valuable. And therein lies one of the most powerful elements of blockchain for the video game industry, is allowing people to trade with anyone in the world virtually instantly. And the blockchain, as your audience might know, has very nice properties. One of these things we call immutability. That is, once somebody sends something to you, they can't get it back unless you give them permission. And so there's when it comes to what we call in the Wall Street world, we call counterparty risk, the risk that somebody tries to unwind a trade. That's impossible in the blockchain arena, and I believe will provide a very nice added value for video games. And I should say, this is the essence of what WAX does. WAX makes it very easy for people who have blockchain-based virtual items to trade them. In fact, WAX is the biggest blockchain in the world by order of magnitude for number of trades per day by people who want to buy and sell these items.
It's okay, fascinating. So one of the key questions I have now is, so where do we go from here? So we before where you jumped on the call, we were talking about sort of Ready Player One as a concept, and how is that even feasibly possible? How are we far away from it? What's next? Where are we heading?
Yeah, well, I'm not joking when I say, I tell my team, my executives, that Ready Player One is a product roadmap for us. It's a near future event, and it's one aspect of it just occurred in Ready Player One. There is a virtual reality for those people who don't know the game, or the movie. It's or the book. The book is very good. This genius has created a virtual world called Oasis, and everybody goes there in their spare time and meets everybody virtually. But there's this connective tissue between the terrestrial world and the virtual world, and you'll see this. In some scenes in the movie, you'll see it more in the book, but where the characters in the virtual world are shopping, and they buy. In one case, a guy buys this haptic suit, this special suit, and which he wears in the game. Well, when he leaves the game, that gets delivered by like FedEx or whatever to his house. And so in December, we invented a new type of crypto coin, and we called it Viral. In the text-based world, there's something called there's a phrase IRL, in real life. Well, we put a V, as in Victor, in front of that phrase IRL. And it's viral, VIRL. So we have created a digital twin of every real world consumer product, or I shouldn't say every, a certain number. Initially, we bought millions of dollars worth of consumer products, sneakers, for instance. And we then created a digital twin of those, and we imprinted them on a blockchain-based token. And it took off very, very fast. We said to people who were on our site, hey, if you would like, you can buy this collectible pair of sneakers, and you don't have to take physical possession of it. You can just take ownership of it with this digital token. And if you want to trade that, there is no boxing up your thing and shipping it off. You can trade it instantly. The very first pair of real-world sneakers we did this to traded 200 times in 24 hours. Now, I can tell you, if you tried to trade a pair of real-world sneakers on eBay 200 times, it would take many years, many years. So that is one area where the sort of this fantasy of Ready Player One has already occurred. And we had done this earlier, 4 years ago. My partners and I had this idea of taking the US dollar and tokenizing it. And a lot of people didn't get it at first. They're like, but dollars are already digitized. They're in your, your Venmo wallet and we're like, oh yeah, you guys don't understand how the banking system works. The banking system is very slow and expensive. So that we called Tether, which was a dollar tethered to this cryptocurrency. And while it took a while for people to get it, today, Tether trades about 1.5 trillion US dollars a year. Mm-hmm. So this new Ready Player One-like token called Viral, it's essentially Tether for consumer products. Okay. And I believe that it has broad applicability to particularly to brands who understand that the value of their product is not just the physical components of the product, but it's something more. And if we can capture some of those things in a digital form and allow people to move it at the speed of light, which is what's great about digital, your product can be enhanced with smart contracts that, every virtual item is a smart contract. And that just means, for your listeners, it can be programmed to do cool things, launch videos, record every transaction that ever happened, provide gifts and promotions by the time the third person owns it. Really cool stuff. So, warning you of a warranty about to expire and so forth. And this has a great applicability to the video game world as well.
But surely then, you can, what you just talked about is the efficiency that a virtual world has over a
yes.
real world, the world that we live in. So surely then you can just recreate new financial institutions in a virtual world to get through all of the legacy stuff that we have to deal with day to day, which is inefficient.
I like the way you put that. New financial institutions in a virtual world. That is sort of blockchain 2.0. Okay. That is where we're going. If you want to look at the, from the analog world to PayPal, that leap, where now I would gather there's more people, certainly more people who are coming of age who have a digital wallet. They've got their online mobile banking app as sort of a first use financial tool over the traditional bank. This is where things are headed. And I like the way you put that, but it's often what happens is, I'm sure you guys experience is, people think blockchain, they think, oh, it's a way to make a payment, right? And in the same way, maybe when the internet was first born, people said, oh, I can send email, right? Well, we've come a long way from email to Amazon to, multiplayer online video games. That's the level of change that I foresee in the financial world and in the video game world that's going to be triggered by these virtual assets that everybody can directly control. You can think about it when you put a deposit in a bank. That money gets commingled and it sits somewhere, and it's not really sitting in a vault, anywhere. It's sort of with the wonders of fractional reserve banking, it's sort of invented money. Well, now imagine if you put your money in a bank and you literally have a claim to a little drawer of cash somewhere in that bank. For some people, particularly people in countries where banking is unstable, and that, by the way, is half the world, that's a much more attractive way for them to start being able to take advantage of the digital financial system than having to trust what in many cases are financial institutions that aren't looking out for their customers.
It just changes it changes the face of everything. It changes the game.
Oh, it does.
So
I would say personal finance.
Yeah.
Personal finance, and there will be. We're working on it now. A mashup of video gaming and personal finance. This is where you start to see this real magic of what seems so simple on its surface, just a blockchain which allows somebody to own a digital asset and move it without intermediaries. That basic kind of like boring notion. When businesses can begin to integrate some of those concepts into their product, most people will probably never know its origins are blockchain, because that part will be hidden, in the same way that when you buy something on Amazon, you don't think, oh, Amazon Web Services data center is doing a good job, but it's what's powering it.
Yeah, totally.
So just hear me out on a creative concept that myself and Stig were discussing just before we started. Is there a possible scenario where, if we assume that Ready Player One type environment works, where you fuse the utility of digital assets alongside the existing capability and the skins, and you layer it into this new digital realm, is it possible there for a user or a gamer to invest a certain amount, $10,000 in a gun or a knife or whatever it may be, that has greater utility value as well, across a number of games, and then to be able to design smart contracts for other users to lease it from them, so that actually they can invest in an asset and make it a revenue generating item within that world that gives them real value in their bank account, their digital sort of bank account, whilst they aren't using it. Say they're at school or at work or wherever they may be, they're not using that asset for 8 to 9 hours of the day. Could it be earning them money in other parts of the world where those gamers are active and online and using it? I've
thought about this a lot, and the venture capitalist in me, what I always do is I look for a latent desire to do something that, were it not for the frictions of everyday life, you would partake in. And it's happened, right? People through Airbnb took idle property. They're not going to be in their home for a few days. Maybe we can rent it out. As far-fetched as it seemed that anybody would do that, people do. I believe that could happen, this notion of you own digital assets and somebody could come along and rent them from you. I have not yet found a consumer use case where I think that would rapidly take off. It's possible, but it's a new behavior, and anytime you want to trigger some new economic activity, you always have to see for whom are the benefits distributed, right? And so if you are someone like an Uber and you're like, well, we'd like people to be able to hail taxis much more easily than hoping and waiting that the guy happens to drive down randomly on your street with your thumb out, they had to build a model where there was an economic incentive for other parties to partake in that, so that a guy with an idle car and time in his hand could show up and drive. I haven't yet thought of all of the people who would benefit from such a thing. Yes, you could lease your virtual item in a game, but there's a lot of people who want to own these things. They want to not just rent the wardrobe, so to speak, but they'd like to have it in their possession or own it. So it'll be a new behavior. My guess is what you just described doesn't happen in the near term. And it's going to take some triggering event. There might be some personal financial element there that would drive it, but I don't see it happening in the short term. People talk a lot about it, but I've been doing video games for a long time, and operating marketplaces allow people to buy and sell their video game virtual items for a long time. And no one has ever asked me, can I rent the virtual item, not buy it? And that makes me wonder where the demand is for that. Okay. Now, what I'm hoping is one of your listeners has already come up with the idea and they launch it, and that would yet unlock additional value, right? If you can rent something, then it has higher value. We've seen this in Airbnb. Places where, and where I am in Los Angeles, there's places like Santa Monica and Venice Beach, popular tourist areas, homes and condominiums that have a high Airbnb usage have gone up in value. Because they, any economist would say, of course, it's a new revenue stream. The same will happen if there is that rental aspect. I just, right now I'm unable to see what the trigger will be for people to embrace that.
I'm kind of leaving this conversation with, I need to work out how to build a virtual bank and potentially a leasing store for weapons, which is quite an interesting takeaway from the podcast.
You're going to be busy.
I know, going to be very busy.
And the reason that's interesting is it's what you just said is that when people hear video games, they're like, oh, that's fun and silly and whatever. A little pastime, but what they don't think about is, how do I make money at this? And the reality is, for 20 years, there have been millions of people making money, buying virtual items, earning virtual items, and then trading those virtual items across the world. It is a massive, tens of billions annually business of trading. It's a commodities trading layer that sits on top of these video games that would, often the video game players don't even think about it, and it's people who aren't even playing the video games themselves who have made a living, a very nice living, buying and selling these virtual items, in the same way that in the stock market there's people who aren't interested really in holding on to the Walt Disney Company stock, but they know that there's an opportunity to make a little something if they buy it today and they sell it tomorrow. So trading is one of those human activities that I think is just, it's like part of our DNA. Since societies have been formed, trading has occurred, and trading is a giant activity of video games and virtual items. And I just see blockchain as a much more efficient, lower cost, safer way to partake in trading. You talk to anybody who does cross-border, and keep in mind the majority of these trades are done by people in different countries, because they don't know that you're in China and I'm in the US. I don't need to know where you are, because all I see is you've offered me an item and I'm going to swap it with another. It doesn't matter where you are because it's digital.
Fascinating. Look, it's been amazing talking to you. I'm very, very conscious that we have quite seriously overrun from the time that you wanted to have with us. One last question then, just to close. So what's coming up for you in 2019 with WAX and OPSKINS then?
So WAX is going to be launching its what we call the protocol chain, or this new blockchain, which we have been building now for about a year. That chain is going to do lots of cool stuff for people in the video game virtual item space. WAX blockchain is the first e-commerce focused blockchain. As I mentioned, it's the number one blockchain by transaction volume, because I'll leave your listeners with this. If they're buying things in the blockchain world or crypto world, as a VC, what I try to do is I try to look at all of these blockchains and say, what is the special nature of that one for why it's needed, why it's not redundant. There's a lot of blockchains out there that don't do much more than the other blockchain. And I like to focus on specific purposes. So there's blockchains that are being built around supply chain, a fantastic use for blockchain. Ours is more on the e-commerce front. and what we call v-commerce, which is virtual commerce. And so over the next year, we will be layering on tools because that's what's missing. It really is missing. A blockchain is nice, but it's like an internet without a browser, or an internet and a browser, but there's no websites. So our focus is building that blockchain so that it does things that blockchains do well, but a big problem with blockchains is the cost. We were on Ethereum initially, and it nearly bankrupted us. So blockchains can be very expensive, at least the way they used to be designed. The EOS blockchain with delegated proof of stake, I think, is the right way to go. It's much faster, much cheaper. And then once you have that, what sort of applications layer on top of it? Viral is one, but you need things like wallets that are easy to use. If you guys have not experienced the joy of trying to use the primary wallet that people use on top of Ethereum, which is called MetaMask, you guys may be more sophisticated than others, but I'm telling you, it's not an easy consumer experience. The primary browser to use the EOS blockchain is called Scatter. Very difficult to use. Now, to a typical developer, they'll say, what do you mean it's not difficult? It only takes a few seconds. For those of us who are used to really simple, great designed apps, the way you have to interact today with the blockchain is missing a lot. And so we are focusing a lot on that, how we can build wallets. We have something called WAX Express Trade that is as simple to use as kind of any typical app you would have. And we're going to have to do a lot more in that area. I see that for us, building out these service layers on top of blockchains as being where we're going to be putting a lot of energy. And I also, whenever I go to conferences and I talk to people who are engaged in building blockchain-based businesses, I say, guys, the blockchains like modern day internets, those are going to advance as they do from a speed and cost capability. Our efforts, our imaginations, our innovations should be around enabling the billions of people who want to take advantage of what these blockchains do, and there are many great things. We need to focus on the onboarding, and think about the internet before the Mosaic browser, which is what Mark Andreessen helped create. Before he turned that, which was still a little wonky, into the Netscape browser, it was hard for the mass market to adopt it. Once Netscape browser happened, that was really the triggering of mass market adoption of the internet. The same is now needed for blockchain. And by the way, I think the industry by which that's going to happen is gaming, because gamers are already used to virtual objects. They're already used to trading virtual objects. So they kind of get that. They just need it to be as easy as doing it in a video game. And that's what we're focusing on.
Awesome. Look, we've 100% run over. Look, it's been really, really amazing having you. Dantes, you got anything else to add?
No, that was fantastic. William, it's been great having you, and hopefully we look forward to seeing you in the virtual realm soon.
Yeah, I'll be in London in a few weeks. I don't know where you guys are based, but
yeah, London's good. Steak is on us next time you're here.
Definitely do it.
I will. In a few weeks, I'll be there. Maybe we can grab coffee.
That would be fantastic. Okay. Thank you very much. And William, if you're listening to this, you are the resistance.